Hey there, it's Liz Garcia, and welcome to another episode of your weekly dose of higher consciousness that you can find on YouTube at trumpeteroftruth.tv.com or on the podcast at trumpeteroftruthradio.com. This is the place to discover what I call the foundational basics and essential understandings for raising your level of consciousness and building a better life. So this week we have three different videos that and three topics I like to cover every week. The main topic for this week is understanding the levels of consciousness of the mind, which if you've been following this podcast or the teachings of Dr. David R. Hawkins, the land of the mind and reason and rationality is at the level of 400 on the map of consciousness. So that's our main topic today. And every month I like to hit on the major the significant levels of consciousness that are referred to on the map of consciousness. This week, it's also 101 Ways to Success, Principles number 2 from Dr. Hawkins' Book of Slides, and our weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz. And we're taking a look at three interesting spiritual places of interest. And the question is, which of these places of spiritual interest are of the highest consciousness? Is it the Vatican, the Taj Mahal, or the Washington National Cathedral? By the way, they are all of super high consciousness, but each one of them is a significant leap between the other, even though they're all super high consciousness. So you want to check out the separate video on the quiz and the separate video on the 101 Ways to Success this week. We're on number 2 in the success realm. Now, before I get started with today's topic, I want to introduce today's sponsor, which is the mindbodyspiritnetwork.com, which is an online community of consciously curated content, online courses, free online events, and exceptional service providers in the mind, body, spirit realm. So I invite you to check out that website, and you'll get all kinds of, this is where you'll find links to this podcast as well, among many other blog topics, videos, my other podcast, which is High Vibe Tribe Interviews.com. I'm sorry, High Vibe Tribe TV.com. It's my interview podcast where I interview transformational leaders in the realm of mind, body, spirit. So thank you to the mindbodyspiritnetwork.com for its loving sponsorship. I happen to be the founder of that, so, we're working together. So today, we're going to talk about the level of consciousness known as the mind, which calibrates at 400 on the level of consciousness. And it can be found in Dr. Hawkins' original book, which is Power versus Force. This book is the most well-known of his dozen or more books that he's written on higher consciousness. It's a bit of a challenge to read because it is of higher consciousness and of the mind and of the non-linear realm. So this is where you'll find the map of consciousness and kind of glean some understanding as to the science of it. How was it formulated? How did he come about it? So Power versus Force is where you'll find that and the initial understandings. I always like to recommend Truth versus Falsehood because it's an easier read, and it's really just an encyclopedia of consciousness calibrations that'll help you put into context where true power is, where truth, like universal truth, the higher you go up the map, the closer to universal truth you're going to get. And Jesus, the Buddha, Krishna, Dr. Hawkins all calibrated at 1,000 on the map of consciousness, which is way beyond most of our capacity to even imagine this enlightened realm. 600 to 1,000 on the map is enlightenment, which at last count, there was only like a dozen people on the planet that calibrated above 600. So it's super rare. And as Dr. Hawkins will attest, and I will attest as well, it's a radical experience and a radical pursuit to pursue enlightenment in this plane of planet Earth. So I'm going to show you this book called the Book of Slides because I use it often. I use it for our 101 Ways videos to inspire me for a conversation. And I'm going to show you what the map of consciousness looks like. It's essentially 6 columns. And each of these monthly ones, I go through each part of the column so you understand the energy field of this level of consciousness. And consciousness really is an energy field. And I love my new metaphor for trying to get what you want in life. Is the gas tank full or is it empty, right? If you're operating from lower consciousness, which is 200 below, there's no gas in the tank to get what you want. If you start operating at in the 200s, the 300s are better because there's more ability to solve problems and manifest what you want. There's more gas in the tank there. And if you want to be Christ-like, Dr. Hawkins-like, Buddha-like, and experience the ultimate level of enlightenment, the gas in that tank, there's enough gas in that tank at 1,000 to offset the negativity of the planet. I can't even fathom that, but it's quantum in nature and huge. So today we're going to talk about the mind, which begins at 400 on the map of consciousness. And it's super significant because mind over matter is true. And I'd love to put mind over matter into context, as well as what you hold in mind tends to manifest, calibrates in the 500s. I think it's 505, the truth of that. So when you understand the truth of that, you got to learn to pay attention to what you hold in mind. Are you holding negativity in mind, which many of us are because we don't know any better? I'm one of them. When I first came to understand that we are the creator of our own experience, I didn't like that at all. I'm like, holy crap. I've created some horrific experiences for myself, and the mind contributes to that. So if you've got programs running that are of lower consciousness and the mind is juicing up thoughts and worries and anxieties about it, you're essentially fueling the creation of what you don't want with a lot of gas in the tank. So the mind is powerful and you don't want to mess with it. It's a tool that it shouldn't be in the hands of children, as an example. So we're going to talk about the levels of the energy, what's going on at the energy level of the mind. And then at the end, I'm going to share consciousness calibrations of people, ways of being that are in the 400s. It's super interesting to know, and where you can put your attention. Like, if you want to be of higher consciousness and raise your own level of consciousness, you got to let go of the lower levels of consciousness in most of your life. I mean, you don't want to be watching movies that are about hatred and killing necessarily if your intention is to be of higher consciousness. To give your attention to that energy field is making it challenging to raise your own level because you're affected by it. You can't help but be affected by it. Because we're like I love the analogy that Conversations with God uses, that we're all a lava lamp of consciousness, right? Which is coming and going with these different levels. And where do you want to put your attention, Do you put your attention on hatred and killing because it's fun in a game? I don't know. You gotta see where your life is at and the results of your life and your thoughts and your feelings. How are you feeling in general? Is kind of an indicator of where you're at on your level of consciousness. So today's all about the mind. It's a superpower for sure. Mind over matter is true. So let's just I'd love to give this basic example. The mind starts in its calibration at 400. And 400 is the level of reason, whereas 405 is the level of rationality. And when you understand the quantum nature, especially when you're getting up in the 400s of these calibrations, it's a log 10. So 400 is 10 to the 400th power, which is huge. I mean, if you've ever taken logs, I always like to say this, it's 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. And the higher you go, the more quantum that half a point or point gets, right? So reason is 400. To be rational is even a quantum leap above that in power and understanding. So I think it's so funny that, you know, there could be judgment about people that tend to be reasonable and rational. And it's actually a good thing if you recognize integrity and balance and intelligence in their position, so to speak, as opposed to emotionality. If you're highly emotional about something, you can be of higher consciousness, but you're more interested in the emotionality of it, which is in the 300s, as opposed to reason and rationality. So it makes sense to let go of emotionality when trying to make an important decision in your life and be reasonable and rational about it. However, there's no judgment if you don't. Who am I to say the spirit that is you, the ultimate intention and the kind of creation throughout eternity that is you today? It's all of creation throughout eternity that brings you to this moment today. And if you decide to make an emotionally charged decision, have at it. Enjoy the experience and the process and the understanding, because we're all, you know, you just got to pay attention. If you want to be of higher consciousness, this is what this is for. You've got to understand where on the map of consciousness do you need to put your attention in order to be that. So to be reasonable and rational is an excellent place to start and let go of emotionality. So I'm going to go through each column here on the map of consciousness. Again, there's 6 columns, and if you're watching this, you can see it. Listeners, you can't see it, but that's okay. You can get the book, or you can go to Dr. Hawkins' website, veritaspub.com, and you can order the map of consciousness and all of his books there. So the level of the 400s is called reason. That's just the name of the level, and the log is 400, or 10 to the 400th power. Now, there's a process going on at this level, as there is in all levels. And this one is a little challenging maybe to grasp if you're not highly intellectual. The process going on at this level is abstraction. So the ability to see beyond linear, perhaps, and seeing in the abstract. I think this is my guess, and I was a big fan of advanced calculus, and then I hit a wall. So I got abstraction to an extent, but then I hit the wall of computer science. I couldn't, like, you know, physics and computer science, I had no clue. So there's a limit to my ability, seemingly, to see beyond a certain level. And last month, we talked about the level of acceptance and the process going on there. As an example, or to put into context, is transcendence, which is essentially the ability to let go of limiting beliefs. And I'm starting to feel the embodiment of that, as opposed to just the understanding. I'm feeling the embodiment of letting go of limiting beliefs and feeling the embodiment of limitlessness to an extent. So these are different processes going on at very different levels. You know, to go from 350, the level of acceptance, to 400 is a quantum leap. Again, 10 to the 350th power versus 10 to the 400th power. And this is all non-linear understanding, is what I'm hoping, that you're going to understand that the truth is non-linear, and that you are not only one level of consciousness, you're a mixed bag of consciousness on a huge variety of topics. You know, you could have a level of consciousness about your appearance. You could have a level of consciousness about your health. You could have a level of consciousness about your own intellect and ability to comprehend. And I feel like there's possibly a limit to maybe there's no limit to my level of intellectual consciousness, but at a spirit level, I didn't come here for that, right? If I put all my attention on the intellect, I'd be a PhD and, you know, researcher and all this, which is not necessarily what you or I or many people came here for. It was to grasp greater understanding in a different area. Like, I am an artist at heart. I love visual design. That's really more my passion. If I was stuck in a lab, that wouldn't be necessarily following my soul's calling, so to speak. So understand that you're a mixed bag of consciousness on everything. And it's kind of your opportunity to take a look at where are you predominantly thinking, feeling, being, right? On all these different topics. And that's the highest level of all of that is kind of where you're gonna fall into an average sort of the whole bag. You're a collective consciousness of your own beingness, your thoughts, your beliefs, your physicality, your actions. All of this creates a level of consciousness within you. So the process going on at the level of the mind is abstraction. So it's greater understanding, essentially. I should look up the word abstraction. And maybe I'll do that because it's good to learn other things. And I do like to refer to the dictionary to get it straight. I mean, I have a general understanding, but it'd be nice to share with you exactly what abstraction means. And I will do that. That Merriam-Webster, okay. Oh, of course. And then they put the definition like this: the act or process of abstracting, the state of being abstracted, which doesn't help. So let's take a look at abstracting, the process of abstracting. Oh, okay. Abstract is difficult to understand. Another definition is disassociated from any specific instance, insufficiently factual, expressing a quality apart from an object. So there's all these different definitions dealing with a subject in its abstract aspects, which is difficult to understand. So abstraction is the ability to understand difficult things to understand. That's my guess. All right, the emotion going on, which is not necessarily an emotion, but this is what he calls it. The energy going on that he calls emotion. So one column is process, the next column is emotion, but the emotion going on in the 400 is understanding, which makes sense because it's the land of the mind. The mind is a capacity to understand, discern, think, whatever. Okay, so understanding is going on here. And when I share affirmations, like I like to help, I find affirmations super helpful if you're transcending lower levels of consciousness. I use the words in the map because they're powerful. So an affirmation I'd like to use is, I understand. So to say, I understand is aligning with the energy of the 400s. I understand it makes sense to let go of lower levels of consciousness, and I'm willing to do it. So here's these mixed processes and emotions from the map of consciousness. Why not use it? Use the mind to understand where the power is. The power is here in understanding. There's power in willingness. There's power in acceptance, and there's power in courage. So depending on where you're at on a topic, you may find it hard to say understand, right? Because that's a higher level of consciousness. You might not be there yet on that topic, but you may be willing to accept that understanding is a higher level of consciousness, and it can serve you in a big way. So there's kind of how I mess with affirmations, is use the processes and emotions that are going on at the higher levels to help align you and get you break free from the lower. So the power of these, this is like energy. There's gas coming in the tank, right? Here's your tank that's empty because you're running on lower levels on a topic. Now you're going to put gas in the tank by saying, I understand, or I'm willing to accept. The gas is going in the tank now because you're consciously saying it, right? You may not fully accept it yet, or you may still doubt it. So you got to play with the energies, and I teach you other affirmations in the lower ones, in courage, on my episodes of courage and willingness, acceptance. There's different types of affirmations that can help you break through. So eventually you can say things of higher consciousness and not feel doubt about it. All right. So the emotion is understanding. The self view, this is really good. When I saw this, I'm like, oh, I can accept this in my own life. So the self view, meaning how do you view your own life and yourself, is meaningful. And I've found myself at lower levels of consciousness on God view, which was a huge wake up call because I didn't know the energy of it was running in me so significantly. And my God view, we'll get to that in a minute. I won't share that right now. But when I understood that self view, if you have a self view that you and your life is meaningful, you're aligning with a super high level of consciousness. And I had no problem accepting that. When I really took a look at the map, I mean, I could accept many higher level, positively oriented self views, but I'm like, meaningful, I can do that. And what I did is you look back on your life and you kind of like do a little journal of like, what were some great moments? Where did I help somebody? What was a breakthrough for me? And it doesn't really matter how other people perceive you. It's how you perceive, like go back and take stock of your life. And I bet you there's one moment in your life that was meaningful and worth remembering and embracing and embodying the meaningfulness of that and aligning with intending to have a more meaningful life if that's what you care to do. And to have a meaningful life is of higher consciousness for sure. So the self-view at the level of consciousness of 400 is meaningful. And the God view at this level of consciousness is that you view God as wise. Now, I have a whole episode on God view and self view, which you can find, in the podcast and the video cast for sure. They're all there. And it's super interesting for me to pose the question to you, what's your self view? Like what came up first, right? What did you feel? It's not necessarily true. The first thing that comes up, it could be what's hidden comes up first. And then as you feel it come up, like I did on my God view. So here's an example of God view. When I first heard the notion of God view, the first thing that came up for me was punishing. And then I thought to myself, I don't believe that. Where did that come from? So you got to understand there could be something buried in your consciousness, in the subconscious or unconscious. I don't know the difference between the two, that God is punishing. And that's kind of a mass lower consciousness view that can be perpetuated throughout religion on the downside. And religions that want to control you will tell you that God is punishing. You're a sinner, like it's kind of effed up. That point of view, it's totally of lower consciousness to perceive God as punishing is not true at all. God at the highest level is like, is higher levels, not the highest, but higher levels, is loving one, all being, and your God view is of self at enlightenment. You realize that you are godding at the highest level of enlightenment. You're present in the knowingness that divinity is the truth of source. And God on the map of consciousness is infinite. It's beyond capacity to understand or whatever. The calibration is infinite. There's no boundaries to creator. So the God view is a super interesting one to take a look at in your own energy field, like what comes up for you. And if you could take a different point of view that's of higher consciousness that you feel comfortable with, like I currently, my God view is I understand based on my own experience and Dr. Hawkins' description of the higher levels of consciousness that God is, we are all God-godding. And when you reach enlightenment, you are in the awareness that you are the presence of God acting out in this body, in this personality type of thing. It's kind of weird to imagine, so I don't suggest you go there because the mind my mind turns it into something negative, which I don't want to do because it's not true. But I can totally accept that God is loving. That's in the 500s. I can totally accept that God is all being, everything that is. I can accept that as an understanding, but I haven't embodied these higher levels yet. I understand them, and this is what I suggest you can do. Use the power of the mind in the 400s to understand the higher truths and choose how you want to view yourself, right? It's preferable, if you care to be of higher consciousness, to view yourself in a positive light, for sure, and forgive yourself for not knowing any better and seeing yourself in a negative light. This is just the opportunity to turn that around. So I want to talk about calibrations in the 400s. They're super interesting. And I'll share a link to this calibrations list, which you can find all of these calibrations in Dr. Hawkins' book, but someone compiled them in a list, and I'll do it on our website too, because it makes sense to have it readily available. But it's a pretty extensive list. So we're going to start with some things to align with, right? And understandings. So objectivism is a way of seeing or being calibrates at 400, which makes sense, right? An objective point of view is reasonable, right? It's not filled with positionalities. It's just objective point of view, factual, let's be reasonable about this. The statement, I think, therefore I am, calibrates at 400, which is, I think Rene Descartes said that. He was a famous scientist, I guess. I don't know the full details of him. It's called Classic Cartesian Thought Form after Rene Descartes. So 400s is a high level of consciousness, but it's still in the 400s is the realm of linear truth in the mind. Whereas the 500, you're entering into the non-linear realm, which is totally a different ballgame. Okay, the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, the Science Channel, all of those types of content on television, they calibrate at 405 on the map of consciousness, which is the land of rationality. 405 is being rational. The game of bridge, the card game bridge, is 410. And it's so fun because my parents used to play bridge, and my grandparents, they played bridge all the time, and I never got bridge. I didn't enjoy it, but I never really came about learning it. So it's interesting to know that the game of bridge is a highly intellectual, beyond rational and reasonable level of consciousness. The government form of democracy calibrates at 410 on the map of consciousness, which is super high and advisable to stay with in the United States. Socialism is a deep dive in consciousness. It's still of higher consciousness, but not that it's not too high. Let me just remember what socialism is. Well, I don't want to try to find it, but I'm pretty sure it's below 300, which is not ideal. To want to take a dive in consciousness in our country to cater to socialism is dumb, if you ask me. It doesn't make sense, though at some level it could make sense. People operating from lower levels of consciousness in the victimhood realm would think socialism is a good idea, whereas to have a democracy serves everybody in a much greater way than socialism. Socialism is in the realm of consciousness that can cause problems, which we don't want. Okay. And last week in my weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz, I spoke about the level of consciousness of the statesman. So a statesman that has the energy of goodwill within them calibrates at 430 on the map of consciousness. And this is a significant level of consciousness relative to the rest of the world. I don't know the exact percentage, but only 15% of the world calibrates at above 200. And of those that calibrate, in the 300s, I'm not sure what that number is. It's probably like 8%. The 400s, maybe 5%. 540 is only 0.5%. So I'd have to look at the map to figure it out, but it's pretty rare for individuals to be in the 400s. So to be a statesman, and an example of a statesman is John F. Kennedy. He was a statesman. Elvis Presley was also of the same level of consciousness as JFK, which is super interesting. Very high level of consciousness. What does this say? Oh, okay, this is good. Now, at the time of this calibration, the Wall Street Journal calibrated at 435. If you want to engage in a reliable source of news and information, the Wall Street Journal is of highest consciousness, presuming that its level of consciousness hasn't changed much. And it can change depending on the leadership. So the Wall Street Journal is an excellent choice to align with higher consciousness and truth, whereas other news organizations like USA Today, I mean, they're fine. I think they calibrate in the 200s, the low 200s. Many news organizations are 200 or below, which isn't ideal, because below 200, they're self-serving and not telling the truth. They're making crap up, essentially. Okay, so the Wall Street Journal is a good one at 435. Altruism. To be altruistic is pretty powerful at 435. And if you're truly altruistic, it is the principle and practice of selflessness, which is good to know. As opposed to selflessness is different than kind of the victimhood overgiving thing. That's a different energy. So are you selfless, standing in your own power, compassionate and loving is kind of the energy? Or are you kind of a milquetoast and you give everything away because there's lack of self-worth going on and you're always trying to, you're always peddling to try to prove self-worth? That's a different energy. And it's not a judgment, it's just an understanding of where are you at, where have you been? If you're exhausted from overgiving, it may have to do with the fact you've got this unworthiness energy running in you that drains you of energy. So you got to learn to let it go. And for those of you that are new to this, I have an entire episode on how to let go of the lower levels of consciousness. Anger, bitterness, resentment, fear, whatever, guilt, shame, all that crap, you got to let go of, because there's no gas in the tank when that's in your energy field. It's kind of sucking up your energy field, and you got to understand that because it's there, it doesn't mean anything. It's there because of the past, and the energy of that keeps feeding the future because you don't know any better to let it go. So that's a whole other topic I highly recommend in season 1, episode 10. So altruism, that's an excellent way of being if you want to be of higher consciousness. You don't have to be altruistic about everything. Choose a topic for which you can be altruistic about. How can you practice selflessness somewhere in your life? Right, so that's a nice little tip for the week, a little action step to take for the week. Where can I be selfless in my life this week with someone, some group, some topic? You don't have to be completely selfless in your entire life because you're not there yet. All right, go where it's easy to be that. Okay, to have surgery performed calibrates at 440. Thank God for that. It's of higher consciousness to have surgery done on you. Of course, you got to be aware of the doctor doing it and feel whether there's integrity in his doing the surgery, or if he's looking for a way to pay for his European vacation. So there's all different combinations of consciousness you got to kind of put into context. How do you feel about someone? This is a great way to trust your intuition. If you're going into surgery, do you trust the surgeon? To have surgery, the actual act of surgery requires a level of consciousness that can actually do it, right? But what's the intention of the surgeon? You got to be aware of the doctor too. Where's he operating from in his interest in doing surgery on you? You got to make sure there's integrity there and not some like low level, I want to go on vacation thing. We got a lot to sort through in this whole consciousness thing. All right. Top US hospitals calibrate at 450. That's good to know. super high consciousness there. There's a high level of integrity and care and brilliance in taking care of people in hospitals. Oh, this is a really good one. The Scout movement, any type of Scout movement, like Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, is of super high consciousness at 450. And though it may seem obsolete, it's an excellent choice to kind of introduce your kids to the notion of becoming any of those, being a part of those organizations, because it's going to align them at a young age with duty, responsibility, leadership, altruism for sure, right? They learn how to be selfless. It's an excellent level of consciousness to align your kids with and introduce them to. Then it's up to them to make the choices, right? We're all here to make our own choices and kind of earn our own karmic merit, which I've, Dr. Hawkins talked about earning your karmic merit, which I really kind of come to appreciate, where you understand you can try to give your kids all the best that you want for them, but they got to earn their own karmic merit in order to move forward and move up. I mean, sometimes you got to have a little suffering and setback and disappointment to move into higher levels of consciousness. But if you see them getting stuck, maybe there's a chance, there's an opportunity for you to then step in and say, I see you're stuck. How can I help you? You do your best to help others, but I've learned, like, if someone wants help, they can ask you to an extent, unless they're really suffering and they won't ask for help. So it's a fine line of understanding consciousness is an interesting and vast topic. So we're not gonna, anyway, the Scout movement, go for it. National Geographic Channel, super high level of consciousness at 450. It's a quantum leap up from the History Channel and the Discovery Channel, which calibrated at 405, still significant and high. This is ideally what you want your kids to watch if you want them to be of higher consciousness. Again, they may not be here for that, so you kind of gotta, walk the tightrope and just allow them to be who they are, and see where you can kind of nudge them if they need a little help every now and then. But you can't force yourself on them. That's of lower consciousness. To force anything on anybody is force. Hence the name, power versus force. Are you operating from a power level of consciousness with your kids or a forceful level, right? You gotta, force is destructive, power is constructive. Okay, this is a super interesting calibrations. Spiritual guides from the non-physical realm. Calibrate at 450 on the map of consciousness. Let me see if I can see the details of this. From the celestial realms, they start at 450 and upwards. And Dr. Hawkins did a live calibration of the existence of spirit guides, which calibrated as true, and that the level of consciousness of spiritual guides started at 450, which is, thank God for that. You need help in your life, like I did in a big way, call in your spirit guides and say, I freaking need help. You can't go wrong at 450 and above. So other interesting things about the 400s. 460 is the calibration of intellectual excellence. So you see someone who's highly accomplished at the PhD level. This is the energy of intellectual excellence is 460. And some people that are calibrated at 460, which is really interesting, is George W. Bush. His attitude in the presidential office, this was calibrated in 2002 to 2003, was 460 on the map of consciousness. That is excellence in service, for sure. The music of the Beatles is 460, not the Beatles, the music of. Lily Tomlin, the comedian, calibrates at 460. How can you not love her? It's interesting to understand people who are really beloved, their level of consciousness is pretty high. And Colin Powell, who was the 4-star general and the Secretary of State, in 2001 and 2005, calibrated at 460. This is the land, again, of excellence, the intellectual excellence in what they're doing. There's a whole bunch more that I could read, but it's going to take too long, so I want to cut it up here. Oh, William Shakespeare calibrated at 465, whereas his works calibrated in the 500s. I think it was 540. The content of his works were a leap above his own level of consciousness, which is still super high and rare. And I just want to share the level of genius is 499 on the map, and people at this level would include Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, Stephen Hawking. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, super interesting. He was at 499. And what's interesting about this level is that it's a block, and Dr. Hawkins calls it a block to the next the spiritual gateway of the 500s, because you're not at you can't break through to 500 because you're not willing to give up the land of the mind and reason and the intellect. You're kind of enamored with it, which is totally fine because we're an evolving planet for sure. And this is a great place to hang out for a few hundred years. Why not? So, but the land of 500, which is love, is of the non-linear realm and a quantum leap up from 499. Again, remember, 10 to the 499th power versus 10 to the 500th power is a quantum leap in consciousness. And we're going to talk about the land of love next month. We do these levels once a month. I haven't done any of the lower levels, but I will dive into those after we hit the high levels. So check out video. So this comes out, the weekly topic comes out every Tuesday on the podcast and the video cast, trumpeteroftruthradio.com, and on YouTube at trumpeteroftruth.tv.com. And then Wednesdays, I send out the weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz. And Thursdays, you'll find 101 ways. And this week, it's 101 ways to success, number 2. Check it out. Thank you for joining me today. If you like what's going on here, comment below wherever you are if you can. Share it on social media. I'd love to spread the joy of raising our level of consciousness together. And my intention, by the way, is to raise the level of consciousness of the planet from its current level, which is around 207, to 250, which is the level of consciousness of neutrality. Imagine a place where the energy is neutral. That would be pretty awesome. That's constructive, positive aspect-oriented energies that serve everybody. So that's my overarching intention. And yeah, share it, like it, comment. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover, leave it wherever you can and I'll find it eventually. And before we go, I always want to say, love is the truth at 500 on the map of consciousness, which is a quantum leap above the mind and the understanding of the mind. And just know that if you align with this, you don't have to embody it yet. Because even I don't understand, I don't feel the embodiment of love yet. What does that feel like? I'm inviting it in. I'm like, what does it feel like? Although I have felt it before. What does it feel like to embody love in a balanced way? I embodied it in an imbalanced way because I took a quantum leap into it. I don't necessarily recommend that if it turns out the way it turned out for me. But love is the truth at 500 on the map of consciousness. And just because you don't believe it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And this is the opportunity to understand. Let's just go with the understanding first that this is the truth, a higher truth than the beliefs of the mind and science. See you next week. I'm not sure what I'm doing next week. Let me look. I don't know if I've decided yet. No, I haven't really. Although maybe I'll do that. There's a book I want to share called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. Pretty awesome how that one came to me. See you then.